January the 17th, 1945, Luzon Island, Philippines. The morning mist clings to the rice paddies like silk torn from the sky. The air smells of wet earth and burning wood. Through the haze, a column of M4 Sherman tanks rumbles forward, their engines growling low and mechanical, a sound that seems to shake the very bones of the jungle. Inside the lead tank, 5 American boys sit cramped and sweating, their faces streaked with oil and dust. They do not speak. They do not need to. They have learned the language of silence that war teaches all men. 300 meters away, concealed in a grove of nara trees, Captain Takeshi Yamamoto presses his field glasses against his eyes. He has been waiting since dawn. Around him, his Type 1 47mm anti-tank gun crew sits motionless, their hands resting on the weapon that has served the Emperor faithfully through Burma, through Malaya, through the early triumphant days when victories seemed inevitable. Yamamoto has destroyed British Valentines with this gun. He has pierced the armor of Stuart light tanks. He has seen metal split and men burn. But what approaches now is different, larger, heavier. The Americans call it the Sherman. Yamamoto calls it the next target. He does not know yet that what he is about to witness will unravel everything he has been taught about American weakness. When Japan entered the war in December 1941, its military leadership held certain assumptions as sacred truths. American soldiers were soft, raised on luxury and cowardice. American equipment was mass-produced trash, quantity over quality, the output of a nation that valued speed over honor. These beliefs were not merely propaganda, they were woven into tactical doctrine, into training manuals, into the very psychology of the Imperial Japanese Army. Japanese officers studied reports of American tanks captured in the Philippines in 1942, the M3 Stuart, lightly armored, easily destroyed. They read intelligence assessments describing American reluctance to engage in close combat, their preference for standoff bombardment, their lack of Bushido spirit. The Type 1 47mm anti-tank gun was designed with these assumptions in mind. It could penetrate 30 millimeters of armor at 500 meters, more than sufficient for the Stuarts, more than adequate for the British cruisers. When Japanese soldiers wheeled these guns into position across the Pacific Islands, they did so with confidence born from experience. At Tarawa, at Saipan, at Peleliu, these weapons had exacted terrible costs, but those battles had been fought against Marines on foot, against Amtraks and light vehicles. The Sherman, when it finally appeared in significant numbers, was something else entirely. It arrived not as a single machine, but as a philosophy made steel. Yamamoto gives the order with a raised hand. The gun crew pivots the barrel, tracking the lead Sherman as it clears the edge of the paddy. The distance closes 400 meters, 350, 300. The American tank does not swerve. It advances with mechanical indifference, as if unaware or unconcerned that death watches from the trees. At 280 meters, Yamamoto drops his hand. The gun barks. The shell screams across the open ground and strikes the Sherman's glacis plate with a sound like a cathedral bell struck by a hammer. Sparks shower, smoke blooms. Yamamoto's crew reloads with practiced speed, their movements sharp and precise. 7 seconds, the second shell flies, another hit, this time on the turret front. The Sherman shudders but does not stop. Its treads churn through the mud. Its turret begins to rotate. The third shell catches the tank at an angle, impacting just below the main gun. The ricochet screams into the sky, and still, impossibly, the Sherman moves forward. Its cannon belches flame. The nara trees explode in splinters and fire. Yamamoto throws himself to the ground, his mind refusing to process what his eyes have seen. 3 direct hits, 3, and the American tank has not burned. The mathematics of armor penetration are cruel and absolute. The Type 1 47mm gun fires a shell with a muzzle velocity of 830 meters per second. Against 30 millimeters of vertical armor, it is devastating. But the Sherman's frontal armor is not 30 millimeters, it is 51 millimeters on the glacis, sloped at 56 degrees. It is 76 millimeters on the turret front. When a Japanese shell strikes at an angle, the effective thickness becomes not 51 millimeters, but 80, 90 more. The geometry of deflection transforms hope into futility. Japanese soldiers did not understand this at first. How could they? Their own Type 97 Chiha medium tanks carried 25 millimeters of armor, sufficient by the standards of the 1930s, hopelessly inadequate by 1945. Japanese tank doctrine emphasized speed and infantry support, not armored duels. The idea that an enemy tank could simply absorb punishment and continue fighting was alien, unthinkable. It violated the natural order as they understood it. But the Sherman was not one tank. It was 40,000 tanks, 50,000. The exact number depended on the model, the theater, the month. American factories produced them the way Japanese workshops produced rice bowls, endlessly, relentlessly, with an abundance that bordered on the obscene. A Sherman destroyed on Monday was replaced by Wednesday, 2 Shermans, 3. They poured off assembly lines in Detroit and Cleveland and Los Angeles, hauled across the Pacific in Liberty ships that themselves were built faster than Japan could sink them. This was the arithmetic of industrial war, and Japan had entered the equation with an abacus. Yamamoto survives the return fire. 8 of his 12-man platoon do not. He retreats through the jungle, pulling his remaining men with him, the Type 1 gun abandoned in the shattered grove. That night, in a dugout 6 kilometers from the front line, he writes in his diary by candlelight. The entry is brief, the characters pressed hard into the rice paper. The American tanks do not die, we fire, and they do not die. Similar accounts surface across the Pacific theater. At Iwo Jima, Japanese defenders report expending entire ammunition stocks against Sherman tanks that retreat, repair, and return. On Okinawa, kamikaze anti-tank teams armed with pole charges manage to disable Shermans, but the tanks are recovered, repaired, and back in action within days. A captured Japanese tank manual from late 1944, annotated by its owner, includes a marginal note beside the section on American armor. Outdated intelligence, disregard. The shock was not merely tactical, it was existential. Japanese military ideology rested on the concept of Yamato Damashi, the spirit of Japan, the warrior soul that could overcome material disadvantage through purity of will. This belief had carried samurai through centuries of conflict. It had justified Japan's expansion into China, into Southeast Asia, into the vast gamble of striking Pearl Harbor. The logic was circular but compelling. Japanese soldiers possessed superior spirit, therefore they would win, therefore their equipment and tactics were sufficient. When that logic met the sloped armor of a Sherman, it shattered like porcelain against granite. Officers like Yamamoto had been taught that Americans were weak individualists, incapable of the collective sacrifice that defined Japanese strength. Yet here was a machine that embodied the opposite, a tank designed not for lone heroism, but for crew survival, for mutual protection, for coordinated mass action. The Sherman's armor was thickest where it protected the men inside. Its design prioritized escape hatches, fire suppression, wet ammunition storage, all innovations that said, quietly but unmistakably, your life has value. This was the true weapon, not the 75mm gun, not the armor, the philosophy. The Sherman was not invincible. German anti-tank guns on the Western Front destroyed them by the hundreds. The Panther, the Tiger, the 88mm flak gun, All could penetrate a Sherman's armor with contemptuous ease. American tankers called their vehicles Ronsons, after the cigarette lighter because they lit on fire so easily. But the European theater was not the Pacific. In the jungles and islands where Japan fought, the Sherman faced Type 1 guns, Type 97 tanks, and desperate men with magnetic minds. Against these, it was a fortress. More importantly, it was replaceable. A Japanese tank commander, if his Type 97 was destroyed, might wait months for a replacement. Japanese industry, strangled by submarine blockades and strategic bombing, produced tanks in the hundreds, not thousands. Resources were allocated to aircraft, to ships, to the defense of the home islands. Tanks were an afterthought, but American tank production was a symphony of excess. When the Marine Corps landed on Iwo Jima, they brought Shermans fitted with flamethrowers, Shermans fitted with bulldozer blades, Shermans fitted with experimental rocket launchers. There were Shermans to spare for experimentation, for redundancy, for the casual luxury of overwhelming force. The Japanese soldier who watched a Sherman roll past his destroyed anti-tank gun was not merely witnessing a machine. He was witnessing the death of his nation's illusions. In the weeks following the engagement at Luzon, American forces continue their advance. Yamamoto's unit is pushed back, consolidated, pushed back again. By March, he is defending a mountain pass with 19 men and 3 rifles. Ammunition is scarce. Food is scarcer. In his diary, he no longer writes about tactics or strategy. He writes about hunger, about the sound of American artillery, about the way the Shermans move through the jungle like iron gods, unstoppable and indifferent. One entry, dated March 22, 1945, stands out. I saw a Sherman today that we hit last week. It bears the scars of our shells, 3 marks on the front, clear as calligraphy, but it has been repaired. It carries supplies to the front. I do not understand this enemy. They do not fight as we do. They do not die as we should. Perhaps this is why they will win. This is the moment of transformation, not surrender. Not yet, Japanese soldiers rarely surrendered, but the quiet internal collapse of the narrative that had sustained them. The emperor had promised victory through purity of spirit. The generals had assured them that American decadence would crumble under Japanese determination. But the Shermans did not crumble. They advanced mile by mile, island by island, absorbing punishment that should have destroyed them, returning stronger, multiplied, tireless. The symbolic weight of those 3 scars on the Sherman's armor became, for Yamamoto and men like him, a kind of mantra. 3 hits, 3 failures, 3 proofs that the war was already lost, had perhaps always been lost, from the moment Japan chose to fight a nation that could afford to armor its compassion. The Sherman tank, in the end, was not the best tank of World War II. It was not the fastest, not the most powerfully armed, not the most heavily armored. British tankers mocked its height. Soviet crews preferred their T-34s. German tacticians exploited its weaknesses with cold efficiency. But in the Pacific, against an enemy whose doctrine had calcified in the 1930s, the Sherman was revelation. It revealed that war is mathematics, that spirit, however fierce, cannot penetrate rolled, homogeneous armor, that the nation which can produce 50,000 tanks will defeat the nation that produces 2,000, no matter how brave, the crews. It revealed most painfully for those who faced it that American abundance was not weakness, but a different kind of strength, the strength to waste, to experiment, to lose machines and build more, to value the lives of tankers enough, to wrap them in steel and send them home when the war was done. Captain Takeshi Yamamoto did not survive the war. His last diary entry is dated April 11, 1945, but his diary did survive, recovered by American forces and later translated. It sits now in an archive, yellowed and fragile, a testament to the moment when ideology met industry and broke. The Sherman tanks rolled on. They rolled through the Philippines, through Okinawa, to the shores of Japan itself. Some bore dozens of scars. Some bore names painted by their crews: Big Red, Eleanor, Hell on Wheels, and some bore 3 marks on their glacis plates, 3 impacts that had failed to kill, 3 reminders that the war had never been about who wanted victory more. It had always been about who could build more Shermans. There is a photograph taken in August 1945 of a Sherman tank parked in a square in Manila. Children climb on it. An American tanker, shirtless in the heat, shares a cigarette with a Filipino civilian. The tank's armor is pocked with scars, 5, 10, maybe more. But it is there, functional, present. A monument not to invincibility, but to the stubborn, practical, almost boring truth that sometimes survival is the greatest victory. Somewhere in the distance, across the water, the home islands burn. The war will end in days, but the lesson endures, etched in steel and memory. That abundance, when married to purpose, becomes unstoppable. That a nation which values the lives of its soldiers enough to protect them will, in the end, outlast the nation that spends lives like currency. The Sherman did not win the war alone, but it carried the men who did. And in the jungle groves and rice paddies where Japanese officers watched their best weapons fail, it became a symbol of something deeper than firepower. It became the iron proof that ideals, no matter how fervent, shatter against the simple, terrible reality of those who can afford to care.